The study of ancient maps can cause a small psychological shock to a modern person. On the maps of the 16th century, he can see very strange things that have no place in modern history. They indicate not only islands that do not exist today, but also entire seas and continents. For example, we have all heard about the Volga Canal. The canal is a canal, seems to be nothing special. It connects the Volga and the Don at the place of their maximum convergence, on the Volgodonsk Isthmus. The opening of this channel took place on the 31st of May, 1952 year. It seems to be an ordinary construction site of the Soviet Union. Well, that's what's strange. On the map of the 17th century, which was drawn by the Dutch merchant Isaac Massa, this channel already exists. And this is quite strange, because the channel only looks small on the map. In order to build it in the middle of the 20th century, 150 million cubic meters of land were taken out. 8,000 machines and mechanisms were involved in the work. Walking and multi-bucket excavators, earth-moving shells, bulldozers and dump trucks. There are about 700,000 freelance workers. Also, 100,000 German prisoners and Soviet prisoners, over 100,000 people, took part in the construction. Just imagine the scale. The middle of the 20th century. 1 million people are involved in the construction of the canal. Now we turn to the map of the 17th century and Isaac Massa, and we see that the channel already exists. Historians certainly have an explanation for this. In 1569th year, the Turkish Sultan Selim II sent 22,000 soldiers up the Don in order to dig a channel between two rivers. However, after only a month, the Turks retreated with great abuse, saying, according to the chroniclers, that even all the Turkish peoples could not do anything here in 100 years. The second attempt was made during the reign of Peter the Great. The work began in 1697th year. They were led by a foreign specialist, Johann. However, in 1701st year, Peter's attention was distracted by the Northern War with Sweden, and the work was stopped. As we can see, historians tell only about attempts to build a canal in the 16th century. According to the dates, we are given an attempt by the Turkish Sultan. It began construction in the 16th century, but the work was abandoned, and there simply could not be this channel on the map of 1633rd year. Peter the Great's attempt is not counted, since he tried to build a canal in 1697th year. That is 64 years after the publication of the map and Isaac Massa, where this canal already exists. There is also a discrepancy with the human resources needed to build such a channel. If almost 1 million people and heavy machinery were involved in the 20th century, then how many people would be needed in the 16th century without machinery? But historians say that the world at that time was quite sparsely populated. For example, the entire population of Russia was about 6 million people. And this is not the only such card. There is a channel on this map too. I have given only one example. There will be more to come. Hello everyone, the history of Pi Channel is with you. Today, we are going to talk about mysterious maps, drowned islands, Zakamsky silver, and the princes of Tartary. Today, I will tell you a lot about our wonderful country. So let's get started. One very educated person gave me quite logical arguments and pointed out small mistakes in my last video. The essence of the question is writing the name of the Murmansk Sea on Mercator's maps. So, in the video, at the beginning, I voiced the Murmansk Sea, but then after reading the comments under the video, on my stream, I decided to accept the subscriber's version, that this sea is signed in Latin as the Murman Sea. As we can see on Mercator's map, Murmanskoye is signed through U, and I still believe that it was signed correctly. Let's return to the erudite critic. I don't mention the name of this person, because in the future, we will probably record a joint video. So, this person advised me not to particularly trust the Mercator map presented. The thing is that this map was released in 1606th year, and Gerhard Mercator died in 1594th, and therefore he did not edit this map himself. After Mercator's death, this map was published by his son. Mercator died almost 12 years have passed, and the sun could have messed up something. For example, it is wrong to sign the C. Of course, I love healthy criticism, and everything in this story seems to be reasoned. Gerhard Mercator died 12 years later. A map is published under his name. Of course, someone could have messed up something. I decided to check everything again, and made sure that I was right after all. You need to read the Merman Sea. And here's why. This map, of course, came out 12 years after Mercator's death, and we will not rely on it. Mercator was quite a prolific cartographer. Every 10 years, he produced atlases of maps dedicated to different countries. The Atlas of Germany and Belgium was published in 1585th year. Italy and Greece in 1590. 36 maps of the British Isles and a map of Russia were published in 1595th year, that is, a few months after Mercator's death. Let me remind you that Richard Mercator died on December 2nd, 1594, and already in 1595th year, his son Robert publishes maps of Britain and Russia. Here is a map of Russia, and we are interested. The Merman Sea is written on it as it should be. I think that Mercator himself worked on this map, since it was released immediately after his death. That would be the end of the story. But the old cards have some kind of magical attraction. When you look at them, an unknown world opens up in front of you, and that's why I found a dozen more very interesting maps, on which you will see amazing things. We'll start with this map of 1598. Why is it interesting? First of all, in the Arctic, we see a huge unknown continent today, which is also on Mercator's maps. Secondly, there is no Antarctica on this map. Rather, the continent itself exists, but it is signed as Australia. And next to Australia, there is the island of New Guinea. Look at the size of this Guinea. It is just the size and shape, very similar to modern Australia. This all makes you think a lot about what is hidden behind fences in Australia. Let's go further, and consider a simply stunning map of the late 16th century. Although there is no date on this map, but I think it was released before the Mercator maps. Now I'll explain why. Let's start with the Slippery Peninsula, and see how the sea is signed. Signed correctly, the Merman Sea. And now I will explain why this map was released before Mercator's maps of the late 16th century. First of all, there is already a city of Kova on this map, but there is no city of Monomast yet. Mercator already has a monomast. Now let's pay attention to the huge number of settlements on this map. Mercator has 10 times fewer of them. It seems to be illogical. Everyone knows that the closer the map is to us in time, the more people live in these territories. And thus we should see more cities. But this is the usual logic. It doesn't work with old maps. It's the opposite here. There are more cities on the old maps. Of course, this can be taken as my speculation, but real things will prove to you that I am right. As I have told you before, the coastline changed very much from the 15th to the 18th century. And for what reasons it was difficult to say. Perhaps this is due to an increase in the level of the world's oceans, but I am inclined to the version of the rise and fall of the seabed. Now we look at the map released before the frame world. We see a huge number of small islands off the coast of Norway. They are no longer on Mercator's map. On both maps, there is a strange lake, which is no longer on modern maps. We will return to this lake later. Now I'm going to show you the main difference. We take the Mercator map and look at this part. It seems to be an ordinary semi-island, and there is Kolgoy Island nearby. Now let's move on to this map. We see Kolgev Island, and next to it, we see an unknown large island. On a modern map, this island has turned into a peninsula. Also, this island is on the map of Isaac Mass 1633rd year, and this ledge clearly correlates with modern maps. Here is this peninsula, which was an island back in the 17th century. Also, this peninsula indicates the imperfection of Mercator's maps. On his maps, he did not designate this place either as an island or as a peninsula. Therefore, we will put Mercator aside, and we will compare the map of an unknown author of the 16th century and the map of Isaac Massa of the 17th century. They almost repeat each other, but have very interesting differences. In the beginning, let's talk about how they are similar. Firstly, they have Kolgev Island, next to which there is a large unknown island, which today has turned into a peninsula. Secondly, there is a strange large lake, with a large river flowing out of it. There is no such lake on the maps today. Now the difference. On the map of the 16th century, the Murmansk Sea. On the map of the 17th century, Isaac Massa is already Murmansk. Lake Ladoga is roughly similar in size, but Lake Onega is radically different. On the map of the 16th century, some strange hydraulic engineering node is drawn on the site of Lake Onega. 2 small lakes and 2 large rivers. In 50 years, it will all turn into a huge Onega lake. And now I'm going to show you the most important proof that the nameless map was released before the map, and Isaac Massa 1633rd year. Look at this bay or by the lake. On this map, it is there. On the map of Isaac Massa, it is no longer there, just as it is not on modern maps. This bay can certainly be attributed to the fantasies of an unknown cartographer that will be prevented by more interesting maps of 1539th year. Here's a look at this reservoir, called Lacus albus. I don't know how exactly it translates, either White Lake or White Bay, but in shape, it looks like an unknown reservoir on a map of the 16th century. The Biarmia inscription is also in its place. It turns out that this reservoir is on the map of 1539th year, and on the map of the end of the 16th century. But on Isaac's map, the mass of this reservoir is no longer there. The map of 1539th year is very interesting. I haven't studied it all yet. I'll show you only the most unusual. Let's start with Iceland. There is a separate detailed map in this series. That's what catches the eye. Huge, round towers, from which water flows away. There are Tartar tents nearby. On one of them, the main symbol of the 16th century is a crescent with horns up, and it is not a Muslim crescent. He is portrayed a little differently. There will be a separate video about this symbol. This sign is very important for the 16th-17th centuries. It was used in almost all countries. High-rise buildings called soka are also interesting. If we go higher, we will see some entrances to underground structures called cryptoporticus. It is very strange that on such a fire-breathing island, as Iceland looks like today, there were some dungeons. Now consider the map of 1558th year. There is Iceland here, but most importantly, there is the island of Iceland next to Iceland. When I saw this island, it was a pleasant surprise for me. I've never heard of this island before. That's what historians write. Prisland is a ghost island that appears on maps of the North Atlantic from 1560 to 1660s. On the maps, the island was depicted south of Iceland, at the same longitude. Currently, it is believed that the appearance of the island was the result of an error. It is possible that cartographers have incorrectly determined the position of one of the Faroe Islands. At the same time, the Faroe Islands are depicted on the same maps as the Fries, but much to the east. Visually, none of the Faroe Islands resembles the outlines of Friesland. That's how simple it is for historians. There is an island on the map, on which settlements are even signed. It is on the map of 1558th year, also on the map of the late 16th century, where we can see the icons of cities. And for historians, it's just a cartographer's mistake. Now let's look on the map of 1539th year, for the place where Petersburg should stand. Let's start from the top of the map. We see tents. There are some catacombs to the left of them. We descend past the disappeared White Bay, and here is the Gulf of Finland. We go to the mouth of the bay, and see the city of Viborg. A huge stepped cone with smoke is painted nearby. It's hard to say what it is, but it looks more like a metal smelting furnace. I did not find Peter, but it is clear that these edges are quite well inhabited. Now let's see what this place looked like on a map of the 16th century. We see Lake Ladoga, the wide Neva, and a settlement is marked on the bank of the Neva. It's really hard to read what it is. Well, Ivan is a city on this map too. On this map, a huge number of settlements are indicated in the area of the White Sea and on the Kola Peninsula, which indicates that these lands were very densely populated in the 16th century. And that's what's strange, by the 17th century, there are fewer settlements, and by the 18th, there are even fewer. Although according to history, it should be the other way around. It was as if at the end of the 16th century, these lands were left without people, and only in the 18th century, Russian settlers came here. Here, for clarity, is a map of 1633rd year. There is a Kola town on Kola, but dozens of other settlements have disappeared. The White Lake disappeared, and the cities disappeared with it. There were cities all along the coast of the modern White Sea. In the 16th century they are, in the 17th century they disappeared. These cities are also not on the map of 1867th year. That is, for 260 years, these lands could not live as well as it was in the 16th century. Now let's move on to the second part and consider some very interesting questions. First of all, Loki Watton's link to his channel in the description drew my attention to a very interesting family that ruled Stroganov in these parts. The history of this family is very curious and ambiguous. When I started collecting information about these people, I found some more interesting facts. First of all, I found confirmation that Siberian silver is of local origin and was produced in these parts. Secondly, I found an interesting version about the Prince of Tartary. And thirdly, the answer is where people disappeared from these vast territories. So, let's get started. And let's start with the Stroganovs. That's what historians write about them. The Stroganovs are a family of Russian industrialists and landowners, from whom large landowners and statesmen of the 16th-20th century originated. The Stroganov family was very influential and was practically the complete master of Siberia. Historians do not know exactly where this genus came from. There are several controversial versions. Version 1. The progenitor of the Stroganovs was a Tatar who adopted the Christian name of Spiridon. This Spiridon married a relative of the Moscow prince Dmitry Donskoy, but later was captured by the Tatars and suffered a martyr's death for his unwillingness to return to his former faith. The Khan ordered to tie him to a post, cut up his body on it, and then scatter it all into pieces from chopping. After the death of Spiridon, which occurred in 1395th year, his son was born named Kuzma, who, in memory of the circumstances of his father's death, received the surname Stroganov. In the middle of the 19th century, historians began to adhere to a different version of the origin of the Stroganovs. They claimed that the Stroganov family came from wealthy citizens of Veliky Novgorod. The fallacy of the Novgorod version was convincingly proved by the historian Vidensky. He showed that the Stroganovs are descended from the Pomers from the Russian north. This version is also adhered to in Soviet historiography. I read the historians' versions and realized that not everything is clean with these Stroganovs. The Stroganovs are one of the most influential families of the Russian state, and historians do not have one common version about their origin. But the Stroganovs literally performed a feat in the interests of the Moscow Tsar. The grandson of the Tatar Spiridon Luka Kuzmich gave funds for the redemption of the Tatar captivity of the Moscow Prince Vasily the Dark. This happened in the middle of the 15th century. It seems to be nothing unusual. The grandson of a Tatar of the late Christianity, out of the kindness of his heart, bought a Moscow prince from Tatar captivity for several tens of thousands of rubles. And this event even seems to be recorded in the documents. The fact of the ransom itself does not cause any special suspicions. But historians at the beginning will compose some kind of fable and only then begin to think. Now I'll explain to you what's the matter. The Stroganov family is the richest family in Russia that really existed. They made their first capital in the salt industry, in the salt of Vykigodskaya. And Inika Stroganov organized it in 1515th year. The fishery was very successful, at the beginning of the salt works, then the fur trade and the first metallurgical plants. I won't go into it, this story is quite real, and is confirmed by a lot of documents. Look, their capital appeared only in 1515th year, with the beginning of the first salt works. Until that time, they were almost ordinary peasants. So, strictly new capital appears in the 16th century, but somehow back in the 15th century, ordinary peasants bought the Moscow prince from the Tatar Khan. Question: where did the poor peasants get mad money for ransom money? There is of course a version that the Stroganovs descended from rich Novgorod merchants, but this version is also practically not supported by documents. Russian historians have learned about the history of the origin of the Stroganov family. Do you know from where? Probably many people will think that from the ancient chronicles. But this is not the case. As usual, Russian historians learn about their history from foreign sources. The first mention of the Stroganovs appeared in the work of the mayor of Amsterdam, Nicholas Witsen. So all the versions of Russian historians of the 18th century about the origin of the Stroganov family were based on one book, which was called Northern and Eastern Tartary. The first edition, which took place in 1692 year, was written by the mayor of Amsterdam, Nicholas Witsen. That is, until 1692. None of the Russian historians knew where the most influential people in Russia came from. In general, this book is very entertaining. Witsen was a very influential man in his time. And using his influence and money, he was able to accumulate a huge array of information concerning Tartary. In fact, Witsen's book is a collective work, a lot of people. There are records from ordinary sailors to the highest military ranks. This is a kind of encyclopedia of everything that people of the 17th century knew about Tartary. I'll leave a link where you can read the original. So, back to the topic of our investigation. Russian historians learned about the origin of the Stroganov family from the Dutch book, and based on these data, they wrote a new history of the Stroganov family every time. We will not read out their stories, but go to the original source and see what is written about the Stroganov family in the book Northern and Eastern Tartary. And that's what it says here about the Stroganovs. The origin of rich peasants named Stroganovs in Russia is as follows. Their ancestor came from the land of gold, or the Golden Horde, located near Astrakhan, and was the son of the Tsar there. He wished to convert to the Christian faith, and went to Russia, where he was baptized according to the Greek rite. The king gave him his own daughter. When this Stroganov got married and began to live in Russia, the Tatars were very unhappy with this and started a war with the Russians. The Tsar sent the most Stroganov from the troops against these Tatars. The Tatars accidentally captured him and whittled his body and so killed him. Stroganov means Stroganov in Russian, and all of his descendants are called Stros, up to the present time. This old Stroganov brought to Russia, as they say, abacus and arithmetic, which they still use to this day. These are bone beads strung on iron rods. Then these Stroganovs were the first to discover Siberia. They helped one robber named Ermak Timofeevich with weapons and supplies. It was I who read out one of the versions, from which it follows that the first of the Stroganov family was a Tatar prince. In general, not some rootless Tatar, as they write in textbooks today, but a fairly wealthy groom, for whom it is not a shame to give his daughter to the Tsar of Muscovy. And if Stroganov was a Tatar prince, it is no longer surprising that his grandson was able to redeem the Moscow prince from captivity. But in Witsen's book, there is another, almost opposite version of the origin of the Stroganov family. We read on page 737. From here, heading along the river, he reached the place where a certain Stroganov lived. This man was originally from Novgorod. Others say he came from the Golden Horde. But, a few years before that, when Tsar Ivan Vasilyevich with a large army went to punish the Novgorodians for rebellion and resistance, this Stroganov with a good part of his treasures, and with the whole family fled to Perm. Ustyug passed by Kagorodok, and settled here, as this country abounds in all meat, fruits and furs. That's all there is in this book about the origin of the Stroganov family. And on the basis of these data, historians of the 19th century came up with their own versions of the origin of the Stroganovs. There is no other information about the origin of this genus. So choose the version to taste the Prince of Tartary, or the Merchant of Novgorod. But this is not the most interesting thing in Witsen's book. I am very interested in the topic of Zechom silver. All historians say that it is imported. But in this book, I seem to have found evidence of the local origin of this silver. Look here, in 1688th year, His Excellency Boyar Fyodor Alexeyevich Golovin traveled through Siberia to the east and went down the Irtysh River to where it flows into the Big Ob River to a place called Samara, or Samarovsky Yam. A little above this point in the river, a very strong current breaks off large pieces of land and falls, changing the channel. It happened that a similar fragment of stony earth fell from the mountain to the low bank of the river, that the skeleton of a long-dead man fell together with the earth in a wooden coffin. There were also silver jewelry, bracelets, a silver necklace, and a silver cup, which was left to me as a souvenir by His Excellency the above-mentioned gentleman, when in 1698 he was here in Holland as the great ambassador of Muscovy. In this silver bowl, a man with a shield in his left hand is depicted, with a large foot on his arm, in the center. Mountains are visible all around, and in some places in the distance, small human figures dressed in rough fur coats. Just think about it. This silver bowl depicts people in fur clothes. But all historians say the same thing, that all Siberian silver is imported from Iran and Central Asia. So why are people in fur clothes depicted on silver from southern countries? This description of the bowl proves the local production of silver because it depicts local people in fur clothes. But that's not all. Bones of mammoths and other strange animals are found all over Siberia. So the bones of mammoths are found, but the skeletons of ancient people are not. And look at what is written in Witsen's book. A Moscow voivode told me that 30 miles below the Uints on the Tanay, he saw bones of people and animals appear in a washed-out layer, near the banks of the river that flows there between high mountains. Then, by order of His Royal Majesty, thousands of human and elephant bones began to be dug there, and at a distance of 2 miles wide and long underground, at a depth of 8 to 10 feet. Human heads, femurs, vertebrae. 2 elephants were lying side by side, fallen on their sides. The skeletons were intact. There are about 2 silver bowls next to these animals. The aforementioned gentleman also told me that he saw a large bone exposed in front of the gates of the Cossack town of Cherkassky, like a human thigh. It was believed that it was a giant's bone. It is said that in ancient times, giants or very large people lived in these parts. That's it. Watch my channel.